I present you Representative Chris Kelly.
I'm sorry that I didn't know it was going to be formal. I would have worn my brown shirt. Yeah, let me get some coffee. It's going to be testy this morning because from time to time I've had a lot in common with some show me stuff, and right now there's not much going that's in that category. This is kind of probably my valedictory here because, as you know, I'm going to turn into a pumpkin here in 2 weeks, and you'll get my bright young successor who is here somewhere, Kip Kidrick, who's going to be the state representative from the 45th district, and thank you, sir, for coming. He's not old and rigid and cranky, so maybe you can convince him to behave better than me. Just some information. First, the tax bill will be decided this morning in the House. And the question, there's only one vote in play. One Democratic person may vote with the Republicans. If he does, the tax bill the override will be successful and go to court. If he doesn't, then it won't. And that's as easy as that. There are two issues with the tax bill. One is whether it's good public policy, and the other is that how is it written. The answer to the first question is a matter of fact. It is the second most slovenly piece of tax work that I've ever seen. Last year's bill being the first, the worst of all time. This year's bill has a section in it that says the top bracket shall be eliminated under these circumstances. Proponents suggest that shall be eliminated doesn't mean shall be eliminated, and therefore will win in court. I differ. I think that it is at least ambiguous, and many of you know that the rule of construction for tax law is that tax law is always construed in favor of the taxpayer, which will mean if the courts construe that the way they have consistently done in the past, that the top bracket in Missouri in the new tax scheme will be struck down, and we will lose a little over $4 billion. And only be able to get it back through an election. And so that'll create problems. Now, the bright spot, in all fairness, on that scenario is theoretically they could fix it next year. They could, don't know if they will. Philosophically, you know all the arguments as well as I do. On one side, there is the belief that if we pass the bill providing less responsibility for society at the upper end of the income spectrum, that the economy will grow. That the other theory is that this bill will, like Kansas, ensure a continuing deterioration of our schools and other governmental services. It is true that this bill is not as bad as Kansas. I never thought of that as, oh my God. I never thought of that as a very good slogan. Vote for me, I'm not as bad as Kansas. But that's the discussion on the bill. What else is big? We will do the gun thing again. The gun thing is blindingly, unarguably unconstitutional. There's no possible interpretation of the law that can lead any rational person to the belief that the gun bill is constitutional. It's a straight out nullification of federal law. And one can think that nullification ought to be the law in this country, but it isn't. And it has not been since the founding, and the founders decided that, And we've had about 20 lawsuits through the United States Supreme Court over the last 200 years on that issue. And in no case, under any circumstances, has any single word of federal law ever been nullified by a state. That's not going to the philosophy of whether it's a good idea or not. That's a matter of absolute, incontrovertible fact. However, as you know, the gun bill does make Republican base happy, and so therefore they will enact it regardless of the Constitution. I think it's pretty unpatriotic to vote for it. Because if you know something, we take an oath to the Constitution, and if you vote for it, knowing that you're violating your oath of office, what is that? Should you go around violating when you know better? What else is happening? Capital improvements is in a lot of trouble. We will probably do Fulton, but not much else. Infrastructure of the state is in very bad shape. We're not taking care of it. We haven't for a long time, and we're going to continue to not take care of it. Yeah.
Can you say what are the other items in the capital improvements?
Engineering school at the university, medical school at Kansas City, Cortex, the train station, the metro station for Cortex, the building for Cortex in St. Louis, the life sciences building at Missouri State, bunch of 50-50 projects.
There's not support for any of these?
No, there's enough support. There is this, passed the House 137 to 11. But there's a couple people in the Senate who will filibuster it.
Oh, I see.
It's the same old, same old. You know, yeah.
And obviously, Obama administration is making it easier to install toll roads. Is there any?
I don't know.
Yeah, they are. They are trying to. I'm not sure.
How can the administration make it easier?
Well,
the Congress could make it easier.
Have to do it through Congress, or can do it by, just a decree from the Department of Transportation. But they're in favor of toll roads, and I'm wondering if that will help toll roads in Missouri.
Here's the situation with toll roads. I did a poll, when we were talking about toll roads, maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, Stephen and I did a big public meeting at the Ark. I don't know if anybody came to it. But did you come to it? Anyway, huge public meeting, 280 people or something in the Ark. We did a poll. Do you like toll roads? Do you like all these other things? Toll road question. You should toll 44 but not 70. I had a colleague in Springfield who did the same poll. You should toll 70 but not 44. That's politically you can't, and besides, I have heard 50 of my colleagues say a toll road is a good idea as long as there's not a toll booth in my district. As long as my people can get on and off the toll road without having to pay. That's the kind of toll road we're looking at. One that you don't have to pay to go on if you're my constituents. Given that mentality, the possibility of a toll road is pretty small. The right thing, my opinion of the right way to do highways is weight distance. Because it's absolutely mathematically tying the cost to the user. Big trucks do all the damage, they should pay more. People say that will cost more in the groceries. Of course it will. That's how a market works. But we're not going to do that. So we'll do sales tax and allow, while we decrease the burden on the wealthy, we will increase the burden on senior citizens and working people, and allow them to pay for the roads. I don't think it'll pass. I think it especially won't pass in the wake of 509. 509 is the tax bill. Because there's too many. I voted for it all along because we got to do the highways and it's the best of a bad situation. But I won't vote for it if 509 passes. Just because, and we really do. The roads are in very bad shape. Yeah.
What caused this to happen in the first place? We used to have pretty good roads and we were working on it.
Yeah.
Then about, it seems like 20 years ago, something went wrong, but I don't know what.
As automobiles became more efficient, the percentage of gas tax pays drops.
That's right.
And so that makes gas tax an decreasingly efficient way to support highway activity. I don't say it's an impossible way, and you should probably, some component of it should be gas tax, but to rely on gas taxes becomes problematic. People say, why don't you bond? You can't bond if you don't have a payment mechanism. So that's the problem. The other thing I don't like about the gas thing is that, yes, it deals with important infrastructure, but it only deals with one aspect of infrastructure. If the gas tax or the sales tax for roads passes, that will mean no money for any kind of education or no local increase for the foreseeable future. It's just dead in the water. Because, I mean, the level of sales tax will be getting so high that, now, I would abolish all the sales tax exemptions. The sales tax exemption on food, on drugs, all of it, bang, gone. Tax across the board. And then if you want to help poor people directly. But I think the sales tax exemption on food done by Democrats was blindingly stupid. And it was done to avoid a Hancock Amendment refund. What we did is we enacted a permanent solution to a temporary problem, if you will. Problem being too much revenue in a given year. Had we just allowed Hancock to work, we would have paid back a little bit that year from Hancock, but the world would have gone on. But no. The Democrats had to pass the sales tax exemptions and build a serious long-term problem in. And the Republicans, not to be outdone in the stupidity category, came back a few years later and did precisely the same thing with income tax for precisely the same reason. Too much revenue in a given year. Instead of allowing Hancock to work, they enacted some permanent income tax decreases. The only differences was each of them went to their core constituent for the benefit, didn't they? Republicans gave income taxpayers a break, Democrats gave sales taxpayers a break, and what happens? Economy of the state of Missouri goes down. I don't think we need to raise any taxes. I just think we have to quit knocking apart the taxes that we have. We could move it between brackets. I would, if given my druthers, move more of the burden to sales tax. I would leave some burden at the upper end in income tax, and I would do a prebate or a rebate at the lower end of the sales tax. But nobody listens to me. We had a bill in the legislature, including my wife, my first wife. She's only been that for 42 years now. And,
She's your last wife.
Yeah, probably. Probably. We had a bill by Representative Burleson from Greene County, I think the only Democrat who supports it, which is to allow the government activity to grow by only so much percentage each year, take the percentage over that, put it in a reserve fund, and then use it in bad years. Its enemy over the past several years is the two parties. The Republicans want to make it more onerous and harder to get to the money, and they want to be able to spend less. The Democrats want to spend money as soon as it walks through the door, and between the two of them, they continue to destroy this thing. Now, Burleson and I have gotten it down to where I think it's a reasonable compromise. The reason I'm for it is, of course, why? 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows. When you have good years, you ought to put a little in the kitty and have it for the good years. The problem, of course, is people in my business can't stand to leave it alone. In the kitty. And if there is more revenue, they can't stand to keep themselves from giving tax decreases, thereby enacting permanent solutions to temporary problems. Yeah.
So, what do you think, putting aside the current tax bills, what do you think philosophically about trading off bringing down the highest marginal tax rates on income and against various tax deductions, tips, and then shifting something over to consumption taxes, sales taxes?
I wouldn't abolish the responsibility of those at the upper income from any income tax liability. But I would support,
No one's arguing that, so give me what,
man, many people are.
we mean you mean zero marginal tax rate?
No, zero income tax.
Okay, fine, okay, go ahead.
I wouldn't go that far. But I would take some of the burden out of the income tax and move it to sales tax. But I would abolish also the exemptions for services. If you have services exempt from income tax, services are much more consumed by the wealthy than the poor, aren't they? It's lots of people who say they support the, quote, fair tax don't want it on stuff that they buy or use or sell. So you have to put it on services as well as on goods, and that makes the burden a little fairer, doesn't it? If you do that.
Except the principle of bringing the top marginal rate down.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. If you have the income is there, but
Placing it somewhere else.
yeah, yeah.
Under the fair tax, services are taxed.
The fair tax is such a amorphous, big title. People use it in all kinds of different ways. For instance, lawyers, doctors, hairdressers, accountants. We get to hairdressers and nail people, my wife says, "Whoa, hang on here." But yes, in the book, the fair tax book, they do. But the term is used lots of different ways.
Goods and services are taxed. That's.
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone, Chris, at a fair tax rally even mention any services being exempted.
Okay, that's good. That's good. As I say, but see, legislators will never, ever, ever support putting sales tax on services. Why? Because if we're the legislature, the minute the bill comes up, he gets up with a bill to exempt what? What's the very first thing to go? Nursing homes. Who is going to put the sales tax on Aunt Susie at the nursing home? No damn buddy. And what's next? Medical services. And once you do those two, the dam's open, isn't it? And that's a lot of money there. Then you get lawyers, you get accountants, you get barbers, you get Ouija board operators, you get whatever. It's all downhill from there. And the nursing home will always be the canary in the coal mine on this. It will always pass, and once it passes, it's impossible to stop the tide.
History supports you.
Yeah.
Florida passed a sales tax on services. It lasted 6 weeks.
Exactly. And besides, who always wins with exemptions? The most powerful people in society always win over time the exemption game. Classic example, big boats at the lake. You know those great big boats at the lake that can barely turn around? Exempt from sales tax. Why? Because they commit them to the United States Navy in case of national emergency. Okay? So what? Maybe the Jayhawks are going to attack down the Osage and we're going to have those big boats to repel them? What is the danger of that we're going to need the pleasure boats at the Lake of the Ozarks that we need to give them a sales tax exemption? But that exemption, I've offered removals of that many times and I always get crushed. Always. Because why? Because the lobbyists have big boats at the lake. It's ridiculous. How about you guys? I go away just incredibly grateful to the people of Boone County. They are fascinating, as you guys, are fascinating to represent, as you can imagine. Because why? Because they're smart, because they're here's the problem with you guys as a constituency. Not just you, but your liberal counterparts and the whole constituency. You're all experts in something. Right? You're like physicists or veterinarians or deans or something like that, right? Doctors, lawyers. You all know something really well. And that gives you the mistaken belief that you know everything really well. And that makes you all highway engineers and basketball and football coaches. And clearly legislators. And that's always been an interesting I see a lot of my work is done for things in and around the med school and the hospital. And now you talk about some experts who know everything. Oh, you just get yourself a few cardiologists and you got some knowledge base that's in every subject. How about questions about anything about the session or, yeah,
You've
Dean?
been around the University of Missouri for many
Yeah.
decades. What's the biggest mistake the university still makes?
Oh gosh, what a good question that is. I think that they're too mousy.
Mousy or mouthy?
Mousy. Mousy. They're afraid. The plumbers union gets, why do you think we have not done right to work or any of those other damn fool right-wing labor schemes yet? Because the labor unions are so tough with the Republicans that the Republicans can't get them done. And people respect people who take care of themselves, who fight for themselves. The university doesn't fight for itself hard enough. The plumbers are tough. The carpenters are tough. They take care of their interests. Now, over time, a lot of carpenters have gotten 2 kids in college in a bass boat, so they think they're Republicans. But the fact of the matter is they take care of the things that are important to them. And the university does not. And the Alumni Association believes that having black and gold clothing means that you're being supportive of the institution. And black and gold clothing is, I'm sorry to tell you, irrelevant to whether the University of Missouri is appropriately funded. Nebraska lost its AAU standing. Does everybody know what the AAU is? The AAU is the Association of big research institutions in this country, and being a member of the AAU is extremely significant to whether or not you get the important, big money, intellectually and academically important research grants in a whole lot of areas across the spectrum. Nebraska lost it. Missouri is near the bottom of the AAU institutions. If Missouri were to lose its AAU status, it would be a terrible blow to the economy of the state. Because if in a few narrow areas WashU does research, in a few narrow areas WashU does wonderful research, wonderful, world class. But in the whole big spectrum of things, most of the big research in the state of Missouri is done here. And we lose our AAU status, and that's a terrible blow to the economy of the state. Especially when this whole one Mizzou concept has been so amazingly successful. This concept of getting these guys to get out of their silos and work across departmental lines has been, I mean, I was over at the Thompson Autism Center, and Judy Miles is a pediatric researcher. She's older than me. She spent her entire career working with little babies on all kinds of stuff. And there's some guys from the engineering school over there, computer guys. What are you doing? I said to her, and she said, these guys are making me models of some physical characteristics of the heads of some of these autistic children, because it may be that there is a way to determine some factors which are relevant to autism from physical characteristics. Now, this is an extremely dangerous thing to do, because in the early part of this century there was a school of science or knowledge which claimed that you could make moral judgments based on physical characteristics, and the name of that was what? One of you academic. Yeah, it's forgotten. And so it's very dangerous to peer back into that window. But Miles is doing it, and she might be wrong. But the fact, she might be intellectually wrong. She's not morally wrong. The fact of the matter is that when you got engineers helping pediatric researchers, that's pretty cool. It's really, really cool. And there's stuff like that that's across the board. And by not funding research, by the fact that the state has so comprehensively failed to fund the university over the last 15 years is despicable. Just absolutely despicable. We're destroying this institution by the death of 1,000 cuts. And when we do things like 509, we contribute to that, in my opinion. Now, I understand that's a judgment rather than a fact.
You want to take one more?
Yeah, I'll do a few more. In every big budget conference, there is a period of time which is mandatory aimless milling around. And so I can maybe miss some of the mandatory aimless milling around time. So, questions? No? Well, thank you for 30 wonderful years. Yeah, Rex.
Let me make a statement. I just learned this morning that the United States Senate has unanimously passed a resolution naming St. Louis as the chess capital of the nation.
Whoa, congratulations to you. To you. You've been a real player in that, so to speak.
Slick move.
That's right, we have the rim shot to finish things
Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
As I was driving over here this morning, I heard a paid ad for the expansion of Medicare.
Yeah, Medicaid.
Medicaid, I'm sorry. The next news thing on the news was the VA hospitals and their phony list in Arizona. And it just seems to me like those stories are tied so closer together that...
Sure, because the reason they're tied together is because it feeds your fantasy about Medicaid. That's exactly what it does. To not do Medicaid expansion in the state of Missouri is blindingly stupid. It costs this community $30 million a year. This community alone. And there are 225,000 people, all of whom are working, who would get health care. There is some reason why every single chamber of commerce in the state of Missouri is on board for this sucker, including such hotbeds of socialism as Kabul and Cape Girardeau. You know, not doing Medicaid expansion is, it's like taking dollars out and throwing them on the ground.
If they're working, why aren't they going to get subsidized premiums from the federal government?
They're the waitress at the cafeteria where the guy can't. I was at Eminence this weekend. I ate in a little cafe there. The waitress is single. She's got 2 kids. She's got no health insurance. The guy who runs that cafe doesn't have health insurance. Yet she works like a dog. And her kids, what happens when her kids get an earache? Ear infection. When do they get it? They get it at 5:15 on Friday afternoon, don't they? You know why? Because that's when all kids get ear infections. It's 5:15 on Friday afternoon. Where does she take the kid? She takes them to the emergency room, which is the worst health care.
Okay, Chris.
No, I'll finish and then I'll come to you. Worst health care and most expensive health care possible in the United States. And why? Because she's got no pediatrician. If she was on health care, she'd have a real pediatrician. Yeah, Michael.
There was a randomized study in Oregon, okay, where randomly people were added to a Medicaid expansion. The hospital emergency room admissions went up 40% among those who got covered by Medicaid. So this idea that fewer people will go to hospital emergency rooms if they're covered by Medicaid has no sense.
That study is a very, very popular kind of right-wing talking point, and it is the reason. There's a whole lot of reasons.
Left-wing talking.
I agree. I've been giving them, haven't I? Haven't I spent 30 years giving them? That's a joke. That I thought you guys would like. I think that it contributed to it. And I think that may happen in the beginning. But I think it's crazy. Now, what I would do is, this is a failure of both parties, Democrats and Republicans. The rules regarding Medicaid, or emergency rooms, ought to change radically. Emergency rooms should not have to treat you if they don't think you have an emergency. And that means freeing them from some tort liability. If you would do that, you would change that paradigm a little bit. There's some truth in what you say. Unusually so. Yes, ma'am.
When you say we're throwing money away,
yeah.
My understanding was that the federal dollars stopped. We're already 1 year into that. And then the residual would fall on the taxpayers of the state.
90-10. The feds will continue to fund it at 90-10.
For how long? Forever?
It's open-ended. We can have a sunset on it where our participation stops when they're at any given time, and then we'd have to reenact it.
So we're dependent upon the Congress, the National Congress, to reinstate that.
Yeah, where does your health care come from?
Columbia Public Schools.
Exactly.
Medicare.
And Medicare. How is it that you and I,
Pay for anybody else.
how is it that you and I are, it's perfectly all right for us to have our health care coming from the government, but not the waitress in Eminence?
Well, the government happens to pay $475 a month here. So I don't know how much of that tab, the federal government is picking up, but that's about as much as I can afford. I can't afford to pay more so that somebody else, when you dump those people on this state, because I don't trust.
Dump those working people.
I'm a working person.
And so is the lady in Kabul,
And I
in
have
Eminence.
3 jobs, and I work minimum wage, so don't cry me a river.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'm working minimum wage at a laundromat, so don't, you can't make any less money than I do.
Well, part of the reason, of course, is that we do things like 509, which will cut teacher pay going into the future. All right, I got to go turn to go to Jeff. Thank you, guys.
509, beginning in 2017 and subject to certain triggers, revenue triggers, would lower the, I'm going to disagree with Chris. He picked one line, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to concede if he really gets into the thick of it. But one line, he read the right line that says $4.8 billion will be lost. However, if you look at the rest of the bill, it looks like the intent of that bill is to eliminate the top tax bracket, but everybody who earns more than $8,000 in Missouri taxable income would be subject to the top marginal income tax rate. So yes, it's going from $9,000 down to $8,000. I think there's a lot of rhetoric about whether $8,000 is only providing tax relief to the ultra rich, but we can talk about that later if you'd like. It's going to lower the marginal tax rate. It takes 5 years, and the trigger is that the revenue has to be $150 million above the minimum of the 3 previous years for that 1/10 of a 1 percentage point reduction to be enacted, to be implemented. It starts at 5% and then increases 5 percentage points a year, again subject to those triggers, that pass through income from small businesses. So think limited liability corporations, subchapter S corporations, limited partnerships. Think of those privately owned businesses. They would be able to deduct 5% up to 25% at the maximum of their income on their Missouri tax on their Missouri tax bill. They'd be able to subtract that. And then there is an additional deduction, means tested, for people earning $20,000 in Missouri adjusted gross income. So those are the 3 sort of key components that are going to affect the revenue stream that people are talking about. You've heard the governor say unambiguously $4.8 billion in lost revenue. He's taken a very strong interpretation of what the top bracket means. The Missouri Budget Project, again, they never show their work, but the estimate is that it's $800 million. I don't know if that's over 5 years or a year. So let me walk you through what I think is the best guess of what's going on. This is a small tax cut, 0.5 percentage point at the maximum, and the most that I can see the impact in terms of the economic growth rate is about 7/100ths of a point to the growth rate in Missouri. Let me put that in perspective. So in the past 15 years, the average growth rate of GDP, the stuff that Missourians produce within the boundaries of the state, has grown 1.03%. That would jump to 1.1% based on this tax bill alone. Compounding helps. We all know that if you put $100 in and you let it sit for 20 or 30 years, you've got a couple of $100 in the bank. Compounding's a wonderful thing, and that 7 basis points shouldn't be laughed at or snuffed, but I just got to say it's small. As I draw out the dynamics of this, as we look over time about what the bill's going to do, it's about a $120 million reduction, the hit is, each year that these 1/10 of a percentage point reduction in the tax rate, this extra 5 percentage points of pass-through income. Every year that those are implemented, the state loses somewhere between $120 million and $130 million, meanwhile ratcheting up the growth rate ever so slightly. Based on just analyzing the effects of this bill, taking away everything else that could happen to the Missouri economy, I can't find a situation where net general revenue, the stuff that's collected by the Department of Revenues, goes down. It is true, it's $120 million lower than it would be if we stayed with the same tax structure that we have now in a given year, but you've still got that compounding growth rate that's going on. And depending on how quickly Missouri catches up to its historical average, we collect a little under 3 cents on the dollar of nominal GDP. So after you take prices into account, a little bit of inflation every year, we collect about 2.8% of nominal GDP in the state of Missouri is collected by the Department of Revenue for this state. If we were to return to that level fairly quickly, then by 2020, the numbers that I was able to compute, by 2025, we'd actually be on a path of net general revenue in this state which would exceed the net general revenue collected under the current tax law. So to say that this is a permanent, mind-numbingly or mind-blowingly reduction in our school qualities and everything else seems a little far-fetched. If we don't return that quickly, it could be 2030, 2035, but remember the bill isn't fully implemented until 2022. So somewhere between, let's just be, I don't want to be hand-wavy about this stuff is important, but somewhere between 3 and probably 15 years it's going to take us to catch up if we were to implement 509 to the flow of revenue that the state collects now. And even in the worst case scenario, even if we permanently went down to a new lower level of say 2.7% of nominal GDP collected by the state coffers, even in that worst case scenario, by 2030, we're only $4 million out of a $12 billion budget in terms of the differences in the collections in state general revenue. You've got something? By 2030, it would be, and even if we had a permanent reduction, 2035, we'd be the difference between the projected path of net general revenue in this state under 509 and under the current structure, the difference between those would be $4 million out of a $12 billion budget. So, look, we can have an open and important discussion about whether 509 is worth it because there could be trade-offs. If we implement 509, it's unlikely that the state is probably going to want to lower taxes until after it's completely implemented. So we may be looking a decade or so before there's any other tax reform that we're talking about. This is a small bill, and for people to run around and try, the scare tactics to me are what seems unjustified.